Hello, Blitz fans of all ages, it's me, PlumCastle, and it has occurred to me that I said I was going to do some more videos on the updates coming to Tier 10, and I believe it's Update 10.3, and it occurred to me that I have not done that yet. So what we're going to be doing in today's video is exactly that. We are going to be taking a look at the changes coming to the German Tier 10s, and that does actually include tech trees and some other things as well. So, if I pull the game out of the way real quick, we can see that in Wargaming's official Discord server, they posted an update at the end of July concerning the Germans. So what we're going to be doing here is going fairly quickly through the 10 or so tanks that we have here and explaining the changes coming to them. And what I'm going to do on the left here is I'm going to have all the tanks so that we can take a look at least the ones that aren't premiums. So, the first one is the Panzer E100. So, if we come and take a look here, there is the Panzer E100. Let's take a look at that. That's what the tank looks like. It doesn't really fit in the screen. So, the Panzer E100's view range and shell speed are going to be slightly reduced. So, naturally, what that means is you're not going to be able to see as far. And as well, shell speed being reduced just means that quite literally these shells are going to be slower when moving through the air. Not a terribly fantastic change when it comes to these types of tanks. It's usually not all that fun, but it is a change nonetheless. After that, the reload becomes about 0.8 seconds longer. Now that's a pretty big oof, to be completely honest. And as well, terrain crossing capacity and hull traverse speed will be improved. So there is a little bit of a buff here to kind of counter some of these nerfs. And then the tungsten rounds consumable is going to be added. So the first half of the sentence does definitely kind of is pretty negative when it comes to changes. However, the second half is pretty good. I'm a little bit mixed on this one. Very, very slightly maybe in favor of this one. Just because even though shell speed being reduced, that's just not fun in any way, shape, or form. And having a longer reload time is not fun either. However, being able to turn around for this particular tank destroyer is actually fairly beneficial. As you can see on the left here, that's a pretty big tank, and it's a pretty heavy one at that. And it's not naturally going to be very good at turning around very quickly. And not having a turret, it can mean that mediums can get a pretty annoying position in the back or to your side. That said, being able to turn around quicker would kind of help with that. And the more interesting thing for me here is tungsten rounds. Now, in case you don't know what tungsten rounds are, they basically artificially give you more damage per shot. You activate them, and I don't remember what the percentage is, but I think it's somewhere in the 20s, I think. It'll give you extra damage one way or another, which is pretty cool. And for a tank destroyer, let's just say theoretically you've got HE on this, and I need to back out of this real quick because I need to see what its HE damage is. High explosive is 1200, so naturally having that increase would be a pretty big shot, to say the least. However, that's enough about the Panzer E100. Let's take a look now at the Gorilla 15. Now, bit of bad news. As far as the changes go, the Gorilla 15's probably got the worst in store for it, which is really unfortunate because this thing has already been nerfed. It's, as you can probably tell, not a super well armored tank. It's actually kind of, well, I'm not sure armor is a way to describe this tank in any way, shape, or form because it really doesn't have any. But anyway, the shell speed and view range are going to be decreased, kind of like what we saw with the Panzer E100. And we're going to see a bit of a theme with those particular stat changes, I believe. As well, the average damage per shot is going to be reduced by 20. That is the big oof here. So, believe it or not, the Gorilla 15 had was it like a 640 alpha at one point, and then it got 40 alpha just nerfed right off of it, so it became 600 alpha, which was already kind of just lame. Losing another 20, and real quick, I will just confirm that is the case. If we look at, armor piercing 60, that means it's going to be 580 damage. If that was a medium or a heavy tank, that'd be a pretty beefy amount of damage. But this is a tank destroyer, and 580 damage is just kind of not great. So that's obviously not great. And that's for all shell types, so that's just AP rounds. So AP would be 580. APCR would be, that would be like 490, which is like pretty much nothing, to be honest. And high explosive would be like 880. Yeah, just not terribly fantastic changes in that regard. The reload time will be 0.7 seconds shorter, though, so that's, you know, almost 3/4 of a second quicker, and that's pretty noticeable and pretty cool, right? Yeah, well, let's kind of just to try to cover a little bit for this. Forward speed is going to be 3 kilometers higher, and terrain crossing capacity is also raised, kind of like, again, what we saw with the Panzer E100. Now, I'm probably going to spend the bulk of the more time on this tank than some others, just because there's a lot going on here. When you reduce the alpha, that is, of course, not a great thing. Now, I get they're decreasing the reload time by 0.7 seconds. That sounds great, right? I'm going to tell you right now that's actually not so great. When it comes to tank destroyers, particularly tank destroyers that have no armor, like the Guerrilla 15, not having that alpha is actually going to hurt you. As interestingly enough is the faster reload, because with a faster reload, that means you're going to be exposing your tank more often. Now, when you expose your tank more often, the more likely you are to get hit by a big, juicy HE shell. And yeah, you're not going to be very happy if you're on the receiving end of that. So yeah, the damage per minute will probably, if anything, it'll probably come out a little bit higher than it is now. But still, I mean, it'll be basically the same for the most part as far as I can tell, with maybe a bit of an increase. But that little increase, I would say, doesn't really warrant losing that much when it comes to the shell damage. And being 3 kilometers faster, other than getting into position, that's actually kind of small beans. When you consider that, again, that a tank destroyer is meant to kind of like find a position and just hold it until they have to move to a new position, top speed really honestly doesn't play a huge thing there. Yes, depending on the playstyle, it can come in handy, but for the average playstyle in this tank, it's not really going to make much of a difference. And crossing capacity increase, that's cool, but unlike with the Panzer E100, because this tank has, I don't remember, it's like a 30 or 45 degree on both sides for the turret, isn't quite as annoying as it would be in a Panzer E100. Still cool, but again, not probably as beneficial as it was for that tank. So overall, this tank just, yeah, oof. And you can see here, yeah, over 3,000 people disliked that, and less than 300 liked it, which is generally an indication of whether or not that's a really great change. Thankfully, though, that's probably about the worst news in this video. And before I get caught up too much on the Guerrilla 15, let's now take a look at the mouse. So if I back out here, we can take a quick look at, where is it? The mouse. And I actually have this tank, which is why it's giving me this metal thingy that I don't really care about. Yeah, I have the special camouflage, but whatever. This is the mouse. So the shell speed is going to be lowered. Again, like we saw with some of the other tanks, gun stabilization becomes slightly worse. Ugh, that's like not my favorite. This tank was never terribly great with its gun handling to begin with, and just say that it's getting worse is not super great, but this is actually a good change. So in the end, it'll be a good change. Reload time and aiming time are reduced by 0.95 seconds and 0.4 seconds, respectively. That is nearly a whole second wiped off of the reload time, which is super fantastic. And an aim time of 0.4 seconds, 0.4 seconds less, you gotta be careful not to slip up there, is actually a pretty big deal as well. So that means, yes, the handling is not going to be as great, but fast reload, and you're going to be aiming quicker. It's probably all in all just going to be a more enjoyable experience despite that. And those, of course, terrain crossing capacity is improved. Again, like we saw with a lot of the other ones. Sandbag armor provision is added. Basically what that does is if you use that provision, it'll just give you more hit points, because this is a mouse and you can get pretty much near 3,000 hit points, and who doesn't like to get more of them? That is going to allow it to have a very, very big hit point pool. And as well, the armor has been changed to reduce the chance of a head-on penetration through the front track wheel. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, it would be kind of surprising why you could damage the tank through the tracks. These tracks, to me, just look like they should absorb, like, pretty much everything. There's just really not a whole lot to hit the track wheel, but, I mean, clearly it was happening, and I will say I'm not, like, the best with the mouse or just tier 10 in general, but I do know that that could definitely happen, and I'm sure it could be very, very annoying. Overall, I would say that this is a good change for the mouse. It makes it a little bit more heavy. I mean, it's already heavy, but giving it more hit points, being able to shoot faster, yes, not as great gun handling. Overall, though, that will make the mouse perhaps a little bit more of a true tank, a beast, which I think is a pretty cool change. Moving on from the mouse, and I don't believe that this is a free tank. I think this is a premium, or I correct myself, a collector tank, the VK90.01P. Let's see here. VK, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the Christmas tank. Either way, I don't have it, and I forgot to get the mod beforehand that'll let me see that tank. Basically, it kind of, if I'm going to describe it, kind of looks like a mix between, say, the mouse that we just saw and the VK 72.01K that we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, that tank, what's going to be happening with it, the reticle calibration and consumable and the sandbag armor are going to be removed. So kind of the opposite of what we saw. So reticle calibration, what that does is it essentially just gives you artificially better accuracy. And then the sandbag armor, like we said, does give you more hit points. So those two things alone are going to be a pretty big oof. Reactive armor consumable and combat stabilization mechanics were added instead. Upper and lower glacis plate get stronger. Now, I have gone up against that tank. That tank is pretty funny. Not funny. It's pretty insane with its armor. It's not the most armored tank in the game, but it's pretty thick. To say that that's getting thicker is going to be a pretty big deal. And when it comes to combat stabilization, that's a type of equipment, if I'm not mistaken. And for the longest time that I can remember, I was pretty sure that equipment was like pretty standard and everything, with like obviously the exception of gun rammer not being on tanks that had a clip in them. So I believe it's something to do with there. It might be in one of the Chinese tanks, or sorry, Japanese heavies. I don't know. Either way, my experience with it is not the best. However, I do know it's a pretty good mechanic. And of course, I do know about reactive armor. Basically, what that does is it reduces all the damage dealt to you. I actually have a few tanks that have it. Generally speaking, you see them on American tanks sometimes. But yeah, to take less damage, I mean, who doesn't like that? So yeah, overall, pretty good change for the VK90.01P. And like I said a few minutes ago, the VK 72.01K, arguably one of the weirdest looking tanks in the game. I mean, it looks like a Luva met I'm going to say E100. It's pretty weird. Average damage per shot is going to be changed down. And in this case, it's going to be going to 600 for, let's see, what are the standard shells here? Let's take a quick look here. So it's AP rounds. Those will be going down to 600. So that's a 40 hit point drop. It's not real great. For heat rounds, it's going to be going down by 45, down to 500. And then it'll be going down to a flat 900 for high explosive. So yeah, not real great, generally speaking. That's going to be felt and is not a terribly fun change. So, on top of what they're doing here, though, because they actually do kind of counter this a little bit better than they did with the Gorilla. So, the HP count is going to be getting reduced by 150 points. That's another negative. Reload time and aiming time become 2.4 seconds and 0.4 seconds shorter. So, like we see a lot with a lot of these, the negative kind of happens in the beginning. And I will say, even though the alpha is being decreased, and that kind of stinks, I can see an argument in the case of 2.4 seconds shorter on the reload time and nearly half a second on the, the aiming time is actually a pretty big deal. And that is honestly pretty cool, especially when you're in a heavy tank. Because when you're in a heavy tank, especially one like this, is very much for brawling in the city or, like head-to-head combat pretty much when it comes to these tanks. Face hugging is probably the norm. So in that case, having a slightly lower alpha in certain circumstances can actually have a strategic advantage, because let's say you and a few other heavies are brawling together and the enemy has somebody who's like, let's just say like 500 health and another one's like 2. no one's going to want to waste their shot on the 2. So naturally, that's not real great. However, if your reload time is faster and your alpha is a little bit lower, then yeah, it might actually make sense to shoot at the enemy that is at 2 hit points. I'm just using 2 as an example. It could literally be 300, 400, maybe even 500. The point is, it is less of a waste of your alpha because the alpha is lower, but also having a faster reload time can kind of help balance out having to use that shot at a time that it didn't really make sense or you really didn't want to do it. On top of this, we do have some other things. So, improved suspension equipment is added instead of camouflage net. This totally makes sense. Improved suspension, I believe, just makes your track stronger. I don't know the exact thing, but I can tell you right now, camouflage net on this thing is practically useless because, again, brawling with other tanks in the city, yeah, you're pretty much within spotting distance like 100% of the time, so it really doesn't, it's not going to help you a whole lot. And then the turret cheeks and round hole parts under the turret are reinforced, which indicates that they're getting stronger. And this tank's armor profile is actually pretty beast-like, and yeah, that's going to make that a very interesting challenge to try to penetrate. Either way, so far the German heavies are seeing probably the best changes so far. They are already beasts in their own right, and to see that they're becoming absolute monsters, yeah, just looking at this, I have a feeling some of these are probably going to be toned back at some point, but maybe not. However, I do think German tanks are about to become pretty interesting tanks to play. Maybe not the best, but certainly interesting. After that, though, we have the good old E100. Now, I have the E100, and you know what? I'm not going to go here because I think this camouflage looks way better for the E100. And there was my mouse camouflage. Anyway, E100, very, very cool tank. In fact, it is the tank that holds the highest damage on my profile. I know it's not like the #1 highest damage, but I thought it was pretty cool. And it's a pretty good German heavy tank. And it's getting a buff. So the E100 has a 152mm gun, and the changes are specifically happening to that gun. So if you are, say, running, if they can find it in here, there is a inferior gun. It's still technically a tier 10 level gun, but it's not the good gun. But the changes are happening to this big one right here. The 152mm gun is going to get its reload time increased by 1.53 seconds. So that's going to be a longer reload time, but the damage per shot grows up to 680, 580, and 1020 for AP, heat, and HE shells respectively. So if we take a look back here, now that I've backed all the way out of there, if we take a look at the stats of the tank, let's see here, what are they currently? It is currently 640, 545, and 960. So that means AP damage is going to be going up by 20 points. That's pretty cool. High explosive is going to be going up by, I want to say that's 35. And then 1020, that's 20, so 60, an extra 60 damage for HE rounds. That's actually pretty cool. Again, reload time is increasing technically, but I can also see an argument for this as well. Because like with the VK 72.01K getting a faster reload kind of makes sense, that's cool. I can also see an argument for the other way around. If you are in a tank, and again, if you're brawling in the city again, you kind of want to do a lot of damage. In some cases, it kind of creates a balance. This would make a platoon between an E100 and a VK72 pretty strong. Maybe a little bit more than pretty strong. It might be like really, really strong, because what you do have in that kind of dynamic is you have the VK72 cleaning up tanks a little bit quicker perhaps, and then you've got this tank just unloading heaps and heaps of damage with each shot. And I will say 680 alpha just for the AP rounds on a heavy tank is, I don't want to say for sure because I don't know for a fact, but that may be the highest alpha of any heavy tank. But please correct me if I'm wrong, but that is a ton. That is an absolute ton. Now, not a whole lot of changes for the E100, but definitely some pretty interesting ones. But moving on now to the Leopard 1. A tank that I don't think I have, but I probably should get it at some point. Oh, I'm actually a lot further away from the Leopard 1 than I thought. Go figure. This is the Leopard 1, and that also apparently has PBR. So the Leopard 1's view range expands to 270 meters. That's pretty good. Reload time gets 0.29. Realistically, that's like 0.3 seconds shorter. Not quite. And then the gun depression angle is reduced by 1 degree. Honestly, a degree of gun depression is probably not going to make much of a difference at all, considering that this is already a medium tank. That might be felt. However, I will say that being able to see further and having a faster reload for something like the Leopard 1s, that totally makes sense. And then to reduce it by 1 degree, I don't think it's going to be too big of a deal. But of course, I could be wrong. But honestly, let's just see what the gun depression on this is already. If we can find it fairly quickly, it's going to be a pretty low number in here if I'm thinking this right. So, view range, main armor, this could take me a second. It would have to do something. Gun turn limit, there we go. Up is 20 and down is 9. Yeah, 9 degrees down to 8 degrees isn't a ton, to be honest. I think the VK28's sitting around 8 degrees, and that feels pretty comfortable. Maybe not, like, super perfect, but it's definitely comfortable. So, yeah, I would say going from 9 to 8 and getting those other things would make this a pretty good change for the Leopard 1. Moving on from this, we have the E50 I'm pretty sure that's shortened, but the E50M, which we can find right here, which, again, also has PBR. Do all of the German tier 10s have PBR? There's that one. Oh, okay, I guess the VK doesn't. Yeah, like pretty much all of them do. Go figure. Wargaming's been busy. So with the E50M, the shell type is changed to APCR instead. Just change to APCR. Speed of the shell will be adjusted downwards. Turret front armor, glacis plate, turret and hull side armor enhanced. Okay. So what that means is instead of AP rounds as your standard, it's going to be APCR, which I believe makes the shell. They're saying adjusted down. So that means it's going to be a slower shell, but I believe there is actually technically an advantage to APCR over AP. The exact thing that it does kind of escapes me, but I think generally speaking, there's something about it I'm not quite sure. Feel free to let me know down in the comments. But anyway, that's just one of the changes. Of course, slower shell speed, and not too fantastic. Turret front armor, upper glacis plate, and turret and hull side armor being enhanced is a good thing. The E50M is actually decently armored for a medium tank, so having more armor is going to be pretty cool when bouncing, and I would argue that does kind of warrant a slower shell speed. Not a whole lot of changes coming to the tank, mostly just slight increases to the armor and such, and just slower shell speed, but I would say overall it's a little bit of an improvement. Not as much of an improvement probably as some of the other things, but an improvement nonetheless. And then there is the Panzer 50T. That is a collector tank, I believe. I don't know if it's in the store. Let's see. I think it was in the store at one point. Oh, and before I forget, actually perfect. There's like all the Germans in here. So this is the Panzer 50T, and also, in case you were having a hard time visualizing it, this is the VK90.01P that we mentioned earlier. So that's what that looks like. But this is the Panzer 50T. Wow, I cannot believe the timing. That was perfect. So the Panzer 50T, the AP becomes the new shell-based type, because if we look here right now, it's currently APCR. So that I think that's technically a negative, but I, again, don't quite remember what it is that's different between those shell types. All shell speeds are reduced. Again, I don't know what it was about shell speed. So, funny thing, with the Americans, if I recall right, it seemed to be too much penetration, which I would never really say Americans were like overly high with penetration, but I could be wrong. And with the Germans, it just seemed to be that their shells were too fast. It seems like each nation just has like something about it. Beyond that, though, the tungsten rounds, consumable, and improved gunpowder provisions were added, which arguably does kind of warrant this. Yeah, slower shell speeds. Looking at this as a medium, you're probably going to be closer anyway. It's not the most armored tank out there, to be honest. However, having tungsten rounds, which, like we said earlier, increases your damage output per shot, is pretty cool. And improved gunpowder. So, get this is kind of like funny. So your overall shell speed is going to be reduced, but instead you can get the improved gunpowder provision, which is good, just going to increase it right back up. Maybe not quite to the extent it was, maybe beyond, who knows. But just at the cost of an equipment slot, a provision slot, something way less important. But at the cost of a provision, which generally speaking, there's, for me at least, a lot that I can kind of just throw away. To have improved gunpowder in here really isn't that much of a loss to be able to get that shell speed back. So overall, I would say that that's actually a pretty decent change. So honestly, if I can find it, yeah, a lot of the American ones just weren't like super fantastic changes. However, with the Germans, with the exception of the Guerrilla 15, because that thing did honestly get butchered, I would say overall, as a change for this particular tech tree, things are looking pretty good for it. I am beginning to wonder just maybe if German heavy tanks are going to become some sort of meta, or maybe they'll be seen more in tournaments. I would kind of like to see that. I am a fan of the German tanks, and this does, on paper, look like it could push some of them into the realm of being just absolute monsters, but of course time will tell. But feel free to let me know down in the comments what you personally thought of the changes, whether you liked them or not. And with that, that does conclude the video, and so with that, I hope you all enjoyed, and as always, have fun, good luck, and happy tanking.